Dude, actually, if you want to hear a funny story, I just decided because of all of my gigs getting canceled and money being tight that I was going to do my own album art for my next 2 albums.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the album art for Big Heart Machine live at the Jazz Gallery.
Mm-hmm.
And which I think looks cool, and I've been getting a lot of compliments like,
Yeah, it looks
like
great.
Wow. Yeah. So what happened was I downloaded Adobe, I don't even remember what the program is called. Adobe, it's not Adobe Draw, Adobe Fresco
Okay.
for my iPad, opened it up and took my iPad pencil and was like, all right, I clicked the first brush that I saw, and then I just went, whoop, and I was like, wow, that looks cool already. and I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm not gonna overthink this. I think that looks cool. And I was laughing the whole day because I was like, I just did my album artwork literally in 20 seconds. And and it was the very first thing I ever did on Adobe Fresco. And I mean, but then since then I did my next record's album art on Adobe Fresco, and I spent like days and days of getting really deep into it. It's just amazing how much the program, like, I guess it's probably similar in so many ways to Logic or Ableton, and I wonder how real artists feel about it, because it makes it really hard to do something that looks bad, you know?
Yeah.
And a real artist would immediately like look at anything I did and be like, they obviously did that on Fresco, because it just gently guides you towards like what's definitely gonna work.
Right.
Know?
Yeah. But if you can trick the masses, it's, good to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, is that what ended up being the album cover for Live at the Jazz Gallery?
Yep.
That's wild, huh?
And I knew it was a good idea because I just was laughing all day long. I literally just did that one thing, and then I was like, that why do anything more? And I'm also like getting into this phase of my life and my professional life where I'm just really trying to stop overthinking and just to start just doing. I think that I mean, you and I don't know each other that well. We've only hung a couple times, and
Sure.
But I think it's safe to say I'm like a little OCD, definitely a perfectionist, like in an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
And I feel like that has prevented me from trying anything.
Sure.
A lot up until like this year, and now I'm realizing that one of the keys to getting better at anything is repeating the process. And if you can't get yourself to do one like record or one Instagram video, or if you can't do it once, you'll never get good at it because you have to do it 100 times.
Right. Yeah.
So
and it's tough to go into that too, because you have to know, being a perfectionist, you have to know when you start something or when you try something new that it's going to suck for a minute. Like, you have to just get past that point. But it's tough to look at your stuff and be like, I know this is going to be good. I just have to keep working at it and keep doing it and trying different things out. But I think that's a plague of the artist in general, is the idea that, especially people who are perfectionists, like, it's easy to get caught up in the minutia and never release anything. I know a lot of people who are really brilliant musicians who continue to make stuff and who never put it out because it never reaches their own, level or whatever they're trying to hear. And yet there's so many people that would love to hear the music.
I tell this story to everyone I can about one of my good friends, Ollie Hirvonen, the guitar player.
Yep.
He basically bullied me into releasing music when I first did, because every time I would see him, he'd be like, "When are you going to make a record?" And I would say, "I'm not good enough yet. The music's not good enough yet. I want to, but I want to wait until I'm good enough. And then one day he, like, I'll never forget, he said to me, like, you're never going to feel like you're good enough. So
Yeah.
if you wait for that day, it's never going to come.
Sure.
And he's right, because I've released 3 records now, and I still don't think that the music's good enough or that I'm good enough, but I am proud of those releases, you know. And with each one you get better and better at the process.
For sure.
So.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the new record. Sounds
Oh,
great.
thanks, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
beautiful
Thank
album.
you. Thanks, man.
Now, let me ask you this. I think that the live record thing really lends itself well to jazz and improvised music, because that's what you're getting in the audience, is the spontaneity of the moment and the experience in the moment. But it's a daunting task to do that, because you don't have the same leeway you would in the studio to try to correct everything or to make it exactly perfect the way that you'd want to or whatever. But maybe that's part of the deal. What did you do to prepare for, being able to just do this? Was it one night at the Jazz Gallery?
Yeah. It was one night. We played 2 sets, and we played the exact same set, both sets.
Sure.
And then, of course, every take came from the second set, because we'd all had a glass of wine at intermission and, like, relaxed a little bit, I think, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, you're so right. It's a different challenge, and I'm really glad that I decided to do it, because, well, at first I just really I love, like, live records in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I really thought that, as much as I love the first Big Heart Machine album, I thought it somehow was missing the actual energy of the band, you know?
Okay, sure.
And because we went so deep in rehearsal, we had Darcy James Argy produce that record, and he's such a perfectionist, and he's made so many records. He really has it down to a science.
Mm-hmm.
And we went wild, basically, with what was available in the studio. Like, we super isolated everything. We did tons of editing. We used a bunch of effects. We, like, did the whole studio thing to the fullest.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, what came out was sort of this, like, perfect representation of the scores, but it was missing something intangible, you know?
Sure. Interesting. Yeah.
And I think there's actually a trend in jazz right now towards perfection on records.
Sure.
And I think that that's doing a couple things, which is, one, giving people like a very unrealistic idea of what a group sounds like in real life.
Sure.
And also is, like, robbing the music of some danger, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, I just realized I'm really not answering your question.
No,
but,
I think, yeah. But
anyways,
that's a component too of a lot of my favorite records, is, like, even the studio, like they had a lot of control over Miles Ahead or Sketches of Spain or whatever, but it's not really about the fact that everything's perfect on those records. Like, the way that Miles plays and, like, some of the cracks and whatever he's doing, or, like, the way that the band is coming together. It's not really, it doesn't have to be super precise. It's about the vibe of the whole thing.
Exactly. And I think that might come with experience in the studio, like, those guys were recording so much, so many days of the year they would be in the studio. So they were comfortable there, and they felt free to take chances and to, like, make mistakes. And they sort of probably knew, like, oh, that take was awesome. The magic was happening there. But, for me, I don't have that much experience in the studio. Every time I'm in the studio, if I had to guess, it might be 5 or 6 times in a year. It's really not a lot. Or, like, 5 or 6 separate sessions, and those might be over a few days.
Sure.
So every time I'm in the studio, I find myself just really focusing on not making mistakes, worrying about a million different details, from like where the catering might be at that moment to somebody's late and we should have started tracking half an hour ago, you know.
Sure. Yeah,
And,
especially if you're the leader of the group.
not
That
really
stuff.
in the zone of.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so what I did with this live record was sort of like engineer a situation where I wouldn't have the chance to worry about it because it was, you know, it was all just happening. It was such a blur, you know?
Yeah, right.
And so there are a lot of mistakes on the record, and I couldn't care less. I love all of them, you know, as
That's
tends
kind
to
of amazing.
happen.
Sure.
Yeah, and the energy is just, I love the energy. I think that it's a really exciting. I think it's getting closer to, you know, what I like in records. You
Sure.
know, it feels, you can feel the tension, you can hear the interaction with the band, and the difficult moments they sound difficult because you can hear the band making mistakes or trying and failing, and so I think it really makes for a nice listening experience.
Sure.
You know?
And that's sometimes what you want too, is you want, there's that famous story of Stravinsky going to Eastman or something like that. I don't know if you've ever heard this. And he kept trying to get people to play the bassoon solo, and everybody could play it. And he was like, that's not what it's supposed to sound like. It's supposed to sound like the struggle of, like all the students were like killing themselves, shedding this stuff. And then they all played it for Stravinsky. He's like, this is all wrong because everybody plays it too well, you know?
Right. Wow, I have not heard that story, and I love that story. Yeah, exactly.
It's the same thing. Mingus used to do it too, where it's like, no, the sound of it is like, in some respects, you know, pushing the envelope a little bit. It's like pushing the musicians to the limit. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, do you have an idea for what your next project is, and how would you do it with the understanding of how the live thing worked as opposed to the studio thing?
Well, my next project is my next small group record,
Okay.
which is done, and that's. But the next big band project, I haven't even started thinking about. Every time I do a big band project, there's a long period afterwards where I just like can't even remember how it all came together, and I can't even imagine doing it again, you know?
Right, yeah.
That's like how I feel right now. I just thinking about all the phone calls and writing and rehearsal and money and whatever. It's all so overwhelming to think about. So I don't know, but I mean, I've applied for a bunch of grants, and I have an idea for a really cool project. It just, I don't know how I'll find the resources to do it.
Sure.
I can tell you about it if you want.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know for sure.
It's a evening length. I want to do a project with basically a death metal vocalist.
Okay.
And the two people that I have in mind are either Mike Patton.
Oh yeah.
Who used? I mean, I don't know how I'd
Bungle?
I don't know how I'd get a hold of him, but he's one of my heroes, and I really love the expressive range of his voice, and I really want somebody who's gonna do like guttural screaming.
Sure.
And if I can't find a way to get a hold of him, I also have been thinking about the singer named Devin Townsend, who is a great death metal vocalist. But anyways,
Well, who does he play with?
well, he had a really, really famous band called Strapping Young Lad in the 90s.
This all
and he
sounds
sang
familiar to me, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Yeah.
He's brilliant. He's such a genius. So, but anyways, the idea is I want to do a concept album about the main protagonist character struggles with bipolar disorder, and so the sort of story or concept of the record would be his internal struggles and how they conflict with the way that he relates to the external world. And it needs to be somebody who can sing beautifully, but also just like scream terrifying guttural screams.
Sure.
And so I really want to do that. And I've been applying for grants with that idea for years and never has anything come through. And I don't know if it's because maybe the material is going to be triggering for a lot of people.
Maybe,
or
but
if it's, I mean, the goal behind it would be to sort of destigmatize talking publicly about mental illness and particularly bipolar, because that's just something that's important to me because it runs in my family. And so, but yeah, I don't know. That's like a long-term goal, but it's an idea I've had for years and years. And so I hope that I'll make it soon.
Have you started writing writing music for it?
Yeah, I've written a lot of different sketches, and also the whole like intro first track is fully realized and ready to, so yeah. What
is your process in writing? Because it's daunting to sit down and say, all right, this is an 18-piece band. Do you have a routine, or how do you operate like that?
I definitely don't have a routine. But I think I should. Do you?
I've found it useful to say to myself, all right, I'm going to go from 10 to noon or something like that every day and write. And the benefit to me in doing that is it gets me over that thing that you're talking about, which is exactly right, which is you go, how am I supposed to do anything? Like, I know I've written countless tunes and charts and whatever, and then you go, well, but how am I going to do that again? And the answer for me is just sit there and do it, and sometimes there's some inspiration, but it's like, if the inspiration comes and I'm not sitting there, it's a different thing, but I try to force myself to do it,
Right. That reminds me of very much of a thing that Jim McNeely used to always say, that he was my teacher and during my master's, and his whole thing was like writing with your sole goal being just filling up lines,
Sure.
like filling space. And he was like, there's a lot of writers like, writers of prose or poetry who do a similar thing. I know Ray Bradbury would just like sit and write and see where his subconscious was leading him. And that was what McNeely like.
Yeah. Bob Brookmeyer used to talk about that as well.
That's probably where McNeely got it then.
Sure.
And so I try to do that, but I don't have a consistent time of day, because I just know that the morning is the time where I'm going to be able to do whatever is the most like nefarious task of the day. So I don't always like, if I need to get some writing done, I'll do it in the morning. But if like I have some other deadline, I'll do that instead.
Sure.
Because I know just like once the morning's over, I start to lose that drive and energy. So, but my process is more just like, well, first of all, I keep a lot of folders and I like making lists. So anytime an idea occurs to me, like I can't tell you how many nights right as I'm about to fall asleep, I end up having to sit up and take out my phone and write a note to myself like, remember to do this. This is a cool idea.
Yeah.
Or rarely, but very rarely, once in a while, I'll have to actually get out of bed and come into the studio and write out the idea. But more often than not, it's just like a little note to myself to remind me, and it'll be something super vague. Like, wouldn't it be cool to have a texture where where all of the brass are glissandoing upwards while all of the, something vague.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I also keep folders on my computer, that I just fill with either like pictures. Like as I was researching this concept album idea that I was telling you about, I did a lot of research about just like just a huge variety of topics that might find their way into it somehow.
Okay.
And I would just either screen grab, like if it was an article or if it was some poetry or if it was some like historical thing, just screen grab it, put it in a folder so you can look at it later. Sometimes it's just a picture and then you open the picture and remember the headspace you were in. So I guess I would say it's very disorganized.
It actually sounds pretty organized all in all, that you have all this stuff in one place, because it would be easy just to say, that's a good idea, but I'll remember that later or whatever.
Yeah. What do people call that? Palace brain or something?
Yeah.
That?
Mind palace or something.
Mind palace.
Yeah.
I just try to like have fun being creative. And then the hard part is editing all that stuff down. You know, you generate lots and lots of material, and we're human beings, so we're pretty vain creatures. So I usually end up thinking that all of it's awesome. And I can't imagine like losing some of it, but then you have to, to
pick and choose. You can only fit so much music onto an album. But so when you go to then write, are you thinking, that's a really interesting approach, because then you have all this stuff as inspiration you can just look to. I mean, even literally look at and say, this is the vibe that I'm going for. This is just something, because this music, instrumental music, maybe in general, or jazz or modern, whatever it is, whatever we're dealing in, is abstract. It's not like you're writing a song about, whatever, there's lyrics and it's about how she broke your heart or something. Like there's a sort of a depth of emotion you can get to. But it's easy also to get kind of hyper theoretical at times and just go into like, oh, these are like colors or whatever. But how do you ground that in something that is that's something that you're aiming at, rather than just sounds abstract,
Right. And I've just noticed about myself, like I love music that is purely like theoretical, abstract, like whatever. I love all kinds of music, but I found that I tend to write better if I give myself some sort of plot or trajectory or formal thing. Like, one of the pieces I'm like proudest of is the suite from my first record called Tamil Pious.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is so simple for that. It's just Mount Tamil Pious is a mountain by where my sister lives. We like to hike it, and I thought it would be great to just make a piece that followed us on a hike and used the natural surroundings, the elevation, the density of the woods, it's you hike down from the top of the mountain to a ravine that has like a little beach and ocean front where you can watch like whales and stuff. And so, then you have
Where is this?
It's in Marin County. I don't know if it's pronounced Marin or Marin. It's right across the bridge from San Francisco.
Okay.
But anyways, and then to get up from the beach back to your car, you have to go up this thing called Dipsy Steps, which is like thousands and thousands of wooden steps up the side of the mountain. And it's like a really physically strenuous. Anyways, it just seemed like a great outline for a piece.
Sure.
And then I just filled it in, and it felt easy to do that. So
because you have something you're going for. It's something that you could almost say. I find the same thing where oftentimes I'll write a piece on sort of on a small concept or on a theoretical concept or whatever, but without an idea of what it might be. I don't know when it's finished. I don't know if I've accomplished the goal exactly. And it could be super abstract, the feeling or the concept or whatever, but just to have that thing to hold on to has always been helpful to me. But I know a lot of people have, there couldn't be a more wide view on how to approach that.
Yeah, and it's all great. You know who I love, and I wish I practiced what he preaches, but I don't really, is John Hollenbeck. He advocates using a different process for each piece.
Interesting.
And that will guarantee you that each piece will definitely be different.
Sure.
And for him, the reason behind that is the goal of composing isn't about the final product. It's actually more about the process and what that teaches you about yourself and what kind of an exercise it is, meditatively, but also ethically and morally. Like I remember seeing him speak about this whole idea where he was saying that for him, if, when you're alone in a practice room, the only person who knows about your decision making is yourself. And so if you want to do it lazily, nobody will know. If you want to rip something off that you've heard before, even if you don't mean anything bad by it, you might be able to cover it up, and so nobody will know. And so he tries to hold himself to a really high standard of the minute he recognizes something in his music that he's heard before or that he's done before, he immediately throws it away. And sort of the only way for him to be able to ensure that every piece will be unique is to have the process itself be unique. And that blows my mind. I don't do that.
It's a lot.
It seems exhausting, but I think it's definitely an ideal,
Sure. I respect the institution for sure.
Yeah.
I wonder if he ever runs into trouble. And I always wonder about this. Like, if you come at it from a very different perspective, if you come at it from every piece from a different, direction, let's say, how hard is it, I wonder, to make a cohesive album or have the tunes sound the same or whatever? Because I can imagine, any number of different ways of approaching a piece, but they may end up with very starkly different results.
That's a great point.
But if you can make it work, it works. And obviously Hollenbeck makes it work. No question there.
Yeah.
Whatever. Is there a way that you think about the cohesion of the pieces that you're doing? Like when you're doing this record, when you're doing Live at the Jazz Gallery, are you thinking about, because you have 3 of your own tunes and then one Ligeti piece and one, that you arranged, and then one by your fiance that you arranged, right?
Yeah.
And it all, to me, really is cohesive. It sounds like one big thing and it all fits the same vibe, even though the tunes are very different. But do you think about like how that's going to fit within the context of the band, or whether it's going to have a particular sound, or how you're doing that? Or is it just, I'm just going to create whatever and it's going to come out the way it comes out?
Yeah, I don't worry about that. I mean, I do worry about like who's going to be playing the music and making sure that giving them parts to play that are like authentic to their style. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, and everybody in the band are close friends of mine and people who I'm fans of,
Sure.
So I listen to their records, I go to their shows. I feel like I have a good idea of how they play. And when I write for them, I try to write things that I know they're going to slay. Mm-hmm. But I don't worry about if the music itself will cohere, because I think that sort of takes care of itself, because it's like the room, the energy of the people, where it comes in the set, all those kinds of things, just sort of, you can't help but hear, what comes to mind is my fiance Molly's song "Glow On." It's very different from something I would ever write, which is what excited me about arranging it for the band, because it's this very diatonic melody. It's a long melody that has a lot of subtle differences from verse to verse and stuff, and it doesn't sound like a Big Heart Machine piece to me at all. That is what's exciting about it. Same thing with the Ligeti piece, Fanfares. I just wanted to be creative, bring it in front of the band, see what would happen. And don't get me wrong, there are times when I do that and I just completely scrap something. Like another one that comes to mind is that tune Recessive, is a pretty old tune. That's the second track on the record. Mm-hmm. And Big Heart Machines played it live twice over the years, and it never worked. And so I never put it on anything. And then all of a sudden I just sort of, one day was like going through unfinished things, and I was like, this is almost finished. I should try and make it work, you know? And I figured out another way to present it that does work for the band. So yeah, I that's a tough question, because so much about the whole process of creating music is very ethereal and by necessity hard to explain, hard to
Sure.
pin down,
Yeah. In many ways, I think it's probably reflective of our own personalities in a way that if you were to meet somebody new and the introduction was, "Hey, what kind of a person are you?" Or something like that, you'd be like, "Whoa, okay, let's see." You know what I mean? There's no way to kind of view yourself maybe from an external perspective, as long as you feel it. But as long as you feel like you're getting your point across, it works.
Right. And I don't remember who said this, but I just heard recently. Oh man, I wish I could remember. I just heard recently somebody say, you are allowed to be more than one thing. Don't let music industry people convince you that you need to have a brand, have a, whatever.
Right.
And that hit me hard because it's true. I mean, we're all complex people. The reason we fall in love with an artist and their discography is because of the fascinating thing of, look how different the music they made when they were 40 was when they were 30 or when they were 20, and
Sure.
where they lived and who they surrounded themselves with. And so, like, just to add on to what you're saying, I think it's important to, we're often encouraged as musicians to have like a boilerplate. Like, I make metal influenced big band, like free jazz, whatever.
Sure.
Like that might be like a one sentence way I would describe Big Heart Machine, but that doesn't mean that's what we always have to do.
Right.
The thing that makes a Big Heart Machine is that it's us, and we change. And
Sure. And you also don't want to fall prey to limiting yourself because you're trying to follow that path that you think people are that you can put into a magazine or on the back of the CD or whatever. Like, you have to follow whatever. And if people did that, if Miles Davis was sitting around in 1952 going, well, what's my thing supposed to be? Like, there's no way he's going to look back and say, well, I'm not exactly Dizzy Gillespie, but I'm in the, you know what I mean? Like, we wouldn't have all this stuff where he said, all right, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And it's the same thing with anything. If Thelonious Monk was like, well, it's kind of like James P. Johnson meets, Duke Ellington, or, whatever. That's not the vibe. It's like, no, you do whatever it is that is expressive of your own time and place and your background and everything.
Exactly. Monk definitely never sat down and said, I'd like to create an original angular approach to piano voicings. Like,
right.
He just sat at the piano and was drawn to things that he thought sounded beautiful. And then luckily for us, we got to watch how it evolved over the course of his career and all the records he made,
Yeah. And luckily he committed to it too, because there's no telling what kind of a backlash he might have gotten at any given time. And certainly not just Monk, Ornette Coleman at the time, he had to stand there and say, this is the thing. This is what I'm doing, while everybody was trying to figure out what it was, and it's fortunately for us, they did it. They stuck with it.
Right.
What was the origin of Big Heart Machine? How did you start it? And also, where does the name come from?
Okay, well, the name, I'll start with the name. I had a band for a hot moment that was called Heart Machine, and that band was a quartet. It was me, Jason Berger on drums, Sam Yolsman on piano, and Adam O'Farrell on trumpet. Mm-hmm. And then I took all the book of music that I wrote for that band, and I just arranged it for big band, and without overthinking it, I just called it Big Heart Machine. And I wasn't sure at the time if the band name was a good idea or not. I just knew that I don't like that in the world of jazz, we tend to focus on the band leader. And I don't think that's very interesting to most people. Like, you or I would know if we're like, oh, did you check out the new Avishai Cohen trio record? Like, a jazz aficionado would be like, oh, that's exciting. But I wanted to make music that didn't give the listener or I wanted to create a presentation that didn't give you a preconceived notion about what you were about to hear.
Sure.
And so
it's not you and a bunch of other people. It's the whole atmosphere of the group.
Right. And I just definitely didn't want it to be about me. And actually, like one kind of oblique influence was the band Snarky Puppy. Even though I wouldn't say I'm a fan of that band at all. They were becoming big at the time when I was starting Big Heart Machine, and I was like, or so many bands before them, just having a band name immediately makes it more interesting because it gives you like different heroes to fall in love with, like why do we love bands like Led Zeppelin? Everybody's got to have their favorite I'm a John Bonham guy, or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
And I like that. I want people to get attached to the whole thing and not just me. And also I wanted it to be a commitment to the people in the band. It was really important to me at that time, and it still is now, to make sure they understand that it's that I appreciate their effort and I consider them a part of the band, because I don't want it to just be a thing where people show up and sit in their chair and read the parts and go home. I want it to be like they know that their part is for them, and so they put every ounce of themselves into it,
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
So that was why I chose to use a band name. I do think it has confused a lot of people over the years.
In what regard?
Well, just people will meet me and have no idea who I am, and then realize that my band is Big Heart Machine, and then make connections. It might have been more pragmatic to just call it the Brian Krock Big Band or the Brian Krock Large Ensemble or something.
Sure.
So there wouldn't be any confusion, but I prefer it this way.
Yeah, you've committed to the vibe, and I think that's critical.
Yeah. And the thing about band names is that it doesn't matter if they're good or not.
That's certainly true. I've noticed that many times over the years. Yeah.
It's just it becomes its own thing, and
right. You don't think about it anymore. Like you hear the name Fish 5 times, and you're like, that's funny. It's Fish, but with a PH. And then it doesn't take long before that just becomes its own thing. You don't think about it at all.
Exactly. Right. But how did the band start? Well, it was basically the people who I was going to school with at the time that I started the band around 2000. 2013 or 14.
Sure. Where were you going to school?
So I did my master's in Manhattan School of Music.
Okay.
And a lot of the people on the first Big Heart Machine record were the people who played my what do you call it, recital.
Sure.
My master's recital or whatever.
And did you do composition?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Which was awesome because I still got to participate in the playing stuff, but I feel like I was lucky in that my classmates still invited me to play with them, so I still improved rapidly during that time as a instrumentalist. But I got to take private lessons with a bunch of different faculty members. My main person throughout the whole 2 years was Jim McNeely, but I also took classical composition lessons, and I took classes on score reading. That was one of my favorite classes, where we would do crazy things. Like the teacher had us at first it was just sitting at the piano and sight reading string quartets, and so you have to deal with the alto and tenor clefs, and then it was transposing multiple different instruments at the same time, instruments in F and B flat and E flat.
Sure.
And then it was just brain twisters. We played this fun game all the time where you would get a note, you would be assigned a note. So your note would be F, my note would be E flat. And we'd have to scan the score as it was going, and you'd look for every single E flat and try to sing it. So if the soprano saxophone was playing E flat on beat 1, you'd sing that. But then if the bass had an E flat on the end of 3, you'd try to grab that as well. And
But
so
the whole time you're
everybody's-
transposing.
Yeah, so you're learning to like quickly transpose, quickly scan a page. I loved that class. But
That's a
it
lot,
was-
man. I don't know.
it was, yeah,
I
think
could
it's
see it being fun. I could see it being a puzzle for like an immediate puzzle solving thing. But like,
yeah.
that's a brain twister for sure, man. You got to dive deep. It takes a certain
Yeah.
kind of person, I think, to really get into it. I can imagine that would be a polarizing exercise.
Yeah, I think a lot of people dreaded it. But so yeah, so like I mean I don't know if it's like it's probably not luck because I'm just a very emotional and like I tend to get philosophical, but I just love the people that I happen to meet at school, and I've always worked with them ever since. And so, like Ollie Hervonen, the guitar player, he was my first session I ever played in New York. Like my dad and I drove out here. He left, and then the next day I like went and knocked on Ollie's practice room door and asked if we could play. And he's still been in every project that I've ever done. And Marty Kenny's similar thing. And I know everybody in the band. So
Sure, man. You know what I want to say is somebody like Ollie is such a perfect choice for the guitar part because he's got like a particular wide range of sounds. Like he can sound like kind of like a more I don't know if folky is the right word, but like Telecaster vibe, and then can also shred or whatever. But I realize as I'm thinking this that probably the reason that is because you're thinking of him in that part as you're writing the parts anyway. It
Right,
sounds like
exactly.
you have a sort of an Ellingtonian approach to writing for the members of the band rather than writing and then trying to find people to fill the seats.
Right, exactly. That's the goal. And it's funny, like, I'm doing this like new video series, and I just finished a video this morning about Carla Bley, and so far, every composer that I've wanted to study about and do a video about, I've found a bunch of quotes from people in their band being like, you could tell they wrote. The other person was Billy Strayhorn. That was the first video I did. Everybody talks about how they could feel that their parts were written specifically for them, and I just think that's we call it Ellingtonian, but I think it's more just like a good band leader,
Sure.
and, and he probably wasn't the first or the last to do that,
No doubt, but he certainly had a knack for it to really highlight those people.
Yeah, I mean that's why we associate it with his band, because again, it's like each person in his band is like their own like superhero, like trading card, like you're like
For sure, yeah.
Or at least
Yeah.
that's how I think about it.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. And man, so let's see here. Let's see. Where do we leave off? The Ellingtonian element of it. So do you find now here's a tricky thing is in New York, we're dealing with so many musicians who are at such a high level and have so many things going on. How do you manage to try to get the same or it's got to be a very similar group, set to set or whatever, but it's got to be you have to overcome the frustration of the fact that you can't always get everybody at rehearsals or somebody's going to be playing a different part or I mean, how much does it change over time, or do you really? I mean, it sounds like you really try to stick to a consistent band, which, as opposed to the Ellington group, is not easy to do. Ellington, of course, had the advantage of being on the road. I mean, I guess I'll call it an advantage, but the advantage of being on the road like 360 nights a year or whatever,
Right,
like
exactly.
crazy thing. So
And-
that band was as tight as it can get, but it's
those
not
guys were
easy to
making-
keep that going.
They were making such great salaries that
Sure.
some of the guys stayed in the band for their whole career,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think big band players naturally gravitate towards that world. And so you know this all too well. You just figure out who are the people who are down to do things, even though they're going to be logistically nightmarish,
Sure.
and you try to keep those people in your circle. But then, yeah, you also have to be flexible, understanding that that people's careers are multifaceted, and they need to make a living and stuff. So, So having a good sub list is great. Also being open to to giving opportunities to younger people who you might maybe don't know as well, but who are looking for their first opportunities, and who don't need to be paid as much,
Sure.
to be on, so,
Yeah. Well, and that's always the struggle too, because it's not the same. I mean, there just isn't the same audience that Ellington had or whatever. It's a different
right.
thing, and it's a niche thing. So the people who are doing it, and this is kind of the beauty of New York too, really love to do it. I mean, they're showing up. Whatever you can make on a big band gig is really more about. It's not about the money as much as it is playing music that you like. And there's so many amazing musicians that are that just want to show up and play a rehearsal at the Union from 11 to 1 on a Tuesday because it's going to be fun to play.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the thing that I'm missing probably the most out of anything right now is that camaraderie. Like, as gigs start to come back, probably the very, very last thing that'll come back will be the big band gig, because there's no way to socially distance to do that, like ethically or whatever.
Sure. Exactly,
so it'll have to be after there's a,
vaccine or something like that.
Vaccine, and right, exactly. So, I think people are going to be really excited to be playing big band gigs when all is said and done.
Boy,
because
I bet
it's just
they will. Yeah.
There's so many friends that we have who you just don't get to see them, except you get to sit next to them for a rehearsal or a gig or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Of course. And it's definitely not. I mean, it's great that everybody's doing all these remote videos and everything, but it's just not the same thing at all. It's actually It's been really eye opening. Everybody I think is trying to find the silver linings here. But one of the things that I've come to realize is since I was, 18, I've just been playing constantly, basically. And this is the first time in ever in my adult life that I haven't been able to play with other people. And it's something that you just it's easy to take for granted when it's just something that you do all the time. I mean, I always love doing it. I always enjoy it, and I'm always happy when I get to show up and play. But now when I'm here, I'm like I find myself trying to find ways of being creative because I miss so much the interaction between other people and just playing music in real time.
Same. Yeah. It's, my mom just sent me a text today with a picture, from exactly a year ago, because my band was on tour. We were playing in Chicago and my mom was in the audience, and she said, "Can you believe this was a year ago?" And I realized so vividly that the world was just a completely different place, and how much I took it for granted that we were able to get in a car, drive to a bunch of different states, play music for crowds full of people touching each other, shake hands with a bunch of strangers, sleep in a bunch of random Airbnbs and hotel rooms and whatever. And how lucky it was to have that as a lifestyle. And then also just like to have my social life be ingrained in my professional life, to where pretty much every single night of the week I was out of the house and I was with people I loved and laughing my ass off. And, it's being a musician is a really, really great standard of living. It's like, it's awesome. The quality of life, even though it doesn't come close to comparing financially to a lot of other careers. I got accustomed to this really cushy, beautiful, environment, and I miss it so much. I think that I haven't fully dealt with it. And part of what I've been doing, which has been, I don't know how personal I should get, but part of what I've been doing is really overworking to avoid dealing with the emotions that I've been having.
Sure.
So even though all of my gigs have been canceled and technically every single day is a free day, a day off, and we could do whatever. Like we could watch a bunch of movies or go to the park or whatever. I've pretty much been waking up earlier than I ever have, wanting to go back to bed because I'm tired, but I can't because I'm so full of anxiety about my future.
Sure.
And then just working maniacally all day long on like video content and whatever, just because I don't want to leave myself time to think about the loss of all the work and all the beauty that it was bringing to my life, you know?
Sure, no doubt, yeah. And everybody, I was going to ask you about that actually, because everybody's got such a different way of coping with this kind of a thing, you know. And some people are like, I find it interesting, and I myself go through phases, but in the beginning, you know, you'd have some people were like, oh, okay, well, this gives me a ton of free time to do all this stuff, you know, all the stuff I've been meaning to do. And then there's a whole, you know, other faction of people that's like, man, I just can't bring myself to be creative at all, you know, and everybody operates with it differently. I go through, in the beginning, I had this momentum from doing all this other stuff, like basically booking gigs and getting ready for the spring over the winter time. And I was like, I was on it forever. I was like, man, I haven't had much time to practice trumpet since I was in grad school. Like I was loving it in some respects, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And then I'll go through some days I'm like, well, part of the benefit of having the gigs and having the rehearsals is to force you to finish the charts or to have things prepared or, you know, have a deadline is huge. So then without a deadline, sometimes I'm like, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Is this like, is there a grounding in this? But I mean, everyone's got a different approach.
I feel you so much. What happened to me was that, I got really sick right at the beginning. I'm pretty sure I had coronavirus, but I never got tested.
Sure.
It was weird because my symptoms were very different from what at the beginning we thought were the symptoms. I was like, I didn't have a fever, but I was like completely exhausted, just body aches all day long, couldn't get off the couch. So I thought at the time that I had a sinus infection or something. And in retrospect, now I've heard so much about how that my symptoms of malaise are pretty common for some people. So now I can't wait for the antibody test to become more reliable because I'm going to get one.
Sure, yeah.
But anyway, so I spent like the first like 2 straight weeks, maybe even more than that, of the quarantine just laying on the couch, really depressed, watching TV, just so exhausted and sick. So by the time I was out of that, I just couldn't wait to like use my body, you know, like
sure, yeah.
I started exercising a lot and practicing a lot. And, and, I do think that the opportunity here is about our relationship as musicians with technology and the internet and blah, blah, blah. Like learning Final Cut Pro, even though every bone in my body is telling me to save money, because because gigs.
Right, of course.
I had just bought a camera and made that investment because I think if we needed a wake up call, this is it. Like,
yeah.
The internet is our friend. And so I feel like the opportunity that is presented itself is like people branching out and making video content, you know, doing podcasts and just trying to like help each other all grow our world.
Sure.
And what we love to do and figure out a way for it to live. Without, so that by the time, my hope is that by the time we're back to gigging like normal, we'll all also keep these new skills that we've learned, and they will help the whole thing thrive a little bit more. You know?
I totally agree. I think that's another one of the silver linings here is that we've been forced, you know, we've been dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century. But I think especially in the jazz world, in the improvised music world, like we are the people who have dedicated our lives basically to blowing air through a tube. Like I play on an instrument from 1945. Like we're not dealing with, you know, this isn't Flying Lotus or whatever. Like we're dealing with these kind of an old school approach, and yet now like it's been interesting to see like everybody on Facebook or whatever is like, oh, okay, what do I need to get for an interface and like a microphone, and how do I do remote recording and all this other stuff. And yeah, I think you're right, especially with like you're doing the score study videos and things of that nature, like being able to put out just ideas, just to be able to kind of spread different ideas, And I started doing this before the lockdown, but then to do it, I was like, well, I have to keep doing this. Like it's
right.
This is what we have, and it's a good opportunity to connect with people, even despite the not being able to play gigs or anything.
Right. And well, I don't know. I'm hoping that, because like I'm not practicing nearly as much as I should be. I've pretty much always delayed engaging with like the internet and making up excuses. I should be practicing. I don't have that much free time, which is true. When you're a gigging musician, it's a super exhausting hustle. You're like constantly learning new music, and then you have to go to some rehearsal at 10 in the morning and then run to the Bronx for a gig at 6. And then,
you're out all night.
Yeah.
It's funny that when you said cushy earlier, I was like, I don't know. I think you're the only person who's ever called that lifestyle cushy, man.
I had never called it cushy before, but it is cushy because it's like, it's really, really beautiful. It is. Like most people, my perspective in calling it cushy is looking at, my siblings and my cousins and people who are in the professional world who are just constantly like, pulling me aside and saying, oh, man, you're so lucky. Your life seems so fun. And like, and it was, I mean, it is, but,
and it will be
traveling.
Again.
It was exhausting and it was anxiety. It was full of anxiety because you're constantly having to think ahead about where your money's coming from and all that. But, so I always had excuses. I was always like, I've got this to do. I just don't have the time. And I would always say to myself when I saw people who were active, like on their YouTube channel or active doing, I would always say, how do they find the time?
Yeah.
And I think the truth is you have to make the time, and people who have been spending years engaging, doing gig vlogs or doing podcasts or whatever, they're in a great position now because they've been learning it over the years and they're set up and ready to go. I'm in a phase where I'm just learning,
Sure.
But I'm hoping that when the quarantine's over, I'll be like ready to integrate it into my real life,
Sure. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that goes too. How, I'll be very interested to see the way in which people then structure their lives after this. There's a lot of things too that I didn't realize that I was doing. Like now, I will go on a walk with Emily through the park on a Sunday afternoon or something like that, just to look at stuff and to be outdoors. You know what I mean? And like before that. It sounds crazy, but if you have a regular job, if you're a business person, you get your weekends or whatever. But before that, there was just no chance that Emily wasn't going to have a thing here, or I wasn't going to be playing a show in Poughkeepsie or whatever, or that the odds of us being in the same place just being like, well, what is there to do today? Like, well, let's go walk around and do nothing for a couple hours and just enjoy the outdoors. There might be some of that we're able to actually bring with us to some degree.
Yeah, and that's I couldn't agree with you more because Molly is an actress and both of us tour a lot and both of us have a lot of side hustles and stuff. So like we're both busy constantly. And just like you said, even though it might seem to somebody who has a more typical Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 type of a situation, it might seem like being freelance is like great because you have all this time, but really you have to make time to take a day off. Like it's exactly what you just said. There's just never a situation where you're like, I'm going to just do nothing today. You always sort of feel like you need to be looking towards the next thing.
Right. There's always that little guy on your shoulder being like, shouldn't you be practicing or writing charts or something?
Yeah. Or if you're not doing that, shouldn't you be emailing dozens of people and following up on those emails? And it's just, there's always something. And if it's not that, it's like, like one of the first things I did in quarantine was revamp my websites.
Right.
Like
there's
I hadn't done that. And
to do. Yeah. Sure.
So yeah, that is good. I mean, Molly and I on Saturday, to celebrate the release of on Friday of the Big Heart Machine record, we took Saturday off and literally didn't do anything. Just laid in the park, went to our favorite pizza place and got takeout pizza, and like it was awesome. So
it's great. So from time to time, that's all right, But I'll tell you, and it speaks to your point just about I think about what a beautiful life it is in some regard, being able to be an artist or to be able to create things. The problem is, too, like the plague of it is that all the stuff that we do, we almost want to do. We basically want to do. Like the problem is, too, is that sometimes Emily and I will schedule like, all right, we're going to take a day off this day. And then we'll both get gigs. We're like, but we want to do those gigs. Like we want to play. Like we get
this is an awesome gig, and you don't want to say no.
So sometimes you just get caught up in, well, this is going to be fun to do it anyway.
Yeah, this could be a whole nother podcast just talking about relationships and a creative career.
Right? Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, go on endlessly.
Yeah.
How do you think about playing in the band versus conducting it? Thinking back to what you were talking about like playing the saxophone and practicing and having that balance or whatever, like, because you played in it for a while, but the last record you conducted, right?
Yeah, and that goes back to your question about what do you do when people aren't free, because my whole idea was to always have Mio Hazama conduct Big Heart Machine, because she's just an incredible conductor, and having her in front of the band, allowed me to relax.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because I knew she'd make sure everything would work. And she couldn't make the gig. And so I just thought, you know what? I know the music better than anybody else. I can practice. I think one of the things I never really put together about conducting was like, I would always just be like, I'm not a good conductor. And that's bullshit, because I'd never practiced, so
right.
Of course, of course I wasn't good. Like, what did I just expect myself to be naturally talented at doing such an esoteric thing?
Right.
Like, so I just practiced a lot, and I actually like conducting now a little bit better than playing, because like Emily, I'm a woodwind guy, and before a gig, it's just too many variables, like all the reeds and making sure all your instruments are warmed up and doing that all in the right order and not overplaying so that you can't play piccolo or alto flute or whatever.
Sure.
I just wanted to separate that from my own creative life, because, I do that for work anyways. And so, yeah, so I like conducting. I do think that, it's a really hard thing to do well, and it's very easy to be, as a conductor, to be a hindrance more than a help, to like do something that screws up the band, and they would have been fine if you just weren't standing there waving your arms,
Right. Yeah.
So
but at least if it's your music and the music, it's more likely than not you'll give them get them in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's interesting, man. It's interesting that you've had that you've come to enjoy conducting. The next project you do, are you more likely to conduct, or would you play saxophone again?
I'll probably conduct from now on Big Heart Machine, and play saxophone in my small group and just call it a day there, because, I love woodwind doubling, but what I love about it, I think, is different than what I love about playing creative original music. I think what I love about woodwind, I think what I love about woodwind doubling is that there is a prescribed path towards getting good at it. Like, I know what I need to do in order to get the result that I want. Because you can remove yourself from it and just say, like, this is considered like a good sound on the clarinet. Mm-hmm. this is the person in New York who everybody tries to sound like, and so that's the ideal. I'm just going to go for that, and then you can diagnose quickly what your issues are. But in creative music, when you're trying to play like yourself, there's no way to do that. You can't you can't say like, oh well, if I just like, it's just a lot more about giving yourself time and space to try things, and reaching for a certain goal, and if you miss, it doesn't matter because you landed somewhere else interesting,
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's the vagueness of it. It just, those two worlds don't seem to go together for me,
Interesting. Sure.
I'd rather be able to just take risks and fail. And honestly, when you're like sitting in a pit and you're about to play an oboe solo, there's no room for taking a risk and failing. You're gonna spend a couple weeks beforehand like dialing it in and making sure you do the same order of events like perfectly, to make sure you'll do that as well as possible.
Yeah. That's interesting because I feel like a lot of people have will be in one camp or the other, in that I know a lot of people, especially, I think, well, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of people in Broadway world are really great. Their love is, all right, the music is going to be in front of me. I'm going to crush it. It's going to, every note is going to be right. Like the fun of it is like nailing the part. And it's the same thing I think with a lot of lead trumpet players are like that. It's just like, no, we're going to hit it and it's going to be correct. Whereas a lot of other people have the mindset of, okay, well, let me try. And I'm probably more in this camp of like, all right, well, what can I do with this or whatever? Or like, I could never see myself playing the same thing night to night to night to night. But it seems like you've actually encompassed both sides of that thing, but it's almost like you have a dual personality going on.
It's like I said at the very beginning of this conversation, is that you can be more than one thing. You know what I mean? Like,
for sure.
You don't have to. So like right after I graduated from my master's, I fell into a Broadway touring, a First National Tour thing that was like a great job. And I said yes. And then I played like over 1,000 shows of Flashdance the musical over the course of a few years. And I would have never thought I could see myself doing that. But I'm so glad I did, because first of all, that enabled me to do so much, like pay for making records and stuff. Like that was like my first time I was really making money. And so it gave me a lot of free space in my head to stop worrying so much and be like, all right, I know for a few years now I've got a paycheck, so what am I going to do with my free time? I loved that feeling. I would love to have it again. I haven't had it since, and it's been like 5 or 6 years now since I've been touring. And but then I, like I'm sure Emily talks about playing shows or playing Radio City or whatever. After a certain number of shows, you stop having fun. You go through these weird waves where it gets really boring and you just like can't even imagine doing it again, but you have to.
Yeah.
And then I just realized, like, for my own sanity, I needed to start thinking about it differently and finding the creative challenge in another avenue. Like the creative challenge wasn't going to be like, what can I do with the music? It was going to be like, how can I, or I started to think like a lot about like bands. Like I started to think about the band Metallica. Like how does Kirk Hammett get himself out of bed and say, I'm going to play Master of Puppets for the 15,000th time?
Yeah, right.
And give it my all. Like I'd never thought about that before. It's heroic being able to do that,
Right, yeah.
And I think it has to come from like the desire to see if you can just do something consistently night after night. And that's a huge challenge in and of itself. And then I got into that because it just became a new world of music where I didn't have to concern myself with putting my emotion into it, or like I never ever play a show and like find myself like laughing at the jokes or getting choked up at the emotional moment. Like I'm more interested in the in the just like workmanship of it, the craft of it. And I
Sure.
love getting the chance to like sit next to one of those people that you're talking about, who's like, like a, well, I don't want to mention any names because I don't want to pigeonhole somebody
Sure.
if I don't really know, but people who are like, just super consistent, and always play everything perfectly.
Right. Yeah.
I like seeing what makes them tick and what can I learn from that.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I've actually been taking lessons recently with somebody who I'm sure Emily is a friend of, Rick Heckman, who's been giving me reed making lessons.
Okay.
And he is a Broadway woodwind doubler. I think he's played 50 or 60 shows in his career. Like he's been the main chair. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I think he's averaged about 2 or 3 different shows every year for his whole career.
That's pretty wild.
Cause he's just like so oriented towards like every day, like how can I make a little bit better of a read, and then the getting into that, and how can I play. He worries about like the temperature and the humidity, the number of minutes that each horn is on your face. Like he worries about things that I never usually think about. And
Sure.
And I've been digging, sort of seeing that perspective.
No doubt. Yeah. Getting deep into the weeds on the specifics of that kind of thing. It reminds me, did you ever see the documentary Hero Dreams of Sushi?
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. That was like one of the first like documentaries that was, I shouldn't say that. There have been many, many amazing, but that one was like a huge deal. Like everybody saw that, right?
Yeah. But that's the vibe. Is this guy doing essentially the same thing for whatever it was, like 65 years or something every day, and just really digging into the quality of the thing. It's a super Zen kind of approach of just saying, all right, well, every time I do this, it's going to be as perfect as I can make it.
Yeah, and also you saying that just reminded me that like the first Big Heart Machine record, all of that music I like wrote and arranged while I was on the road, because another big problem I had on with touring was like like when we do jazz tours or whatever, you're always like every day you're on the road a lot of the day, and you don't really ever have time to yourself. Yeah. But on like the Broadway shows, like you sit down in a city for like a week or 2 or sometimes a month, and you don't have anything to do all day until it's 7:00 and you go play a show that you could play in your sleep.
Right.
And so a big problem I was having was just like boredom, and I would have never ever had the time to write all that music if I didn't have all day free. Like now I find it so hard to write big band music because you're doing it in these little holes of free time.
Sure.
Whereas and I could do that all day, every day, and not feel guilty because I knew I would be going to work at night.
Right, for sure. Yeah. It's an interesting point. It actually sheds some light on because it seems like you've been super productive, man. You put out the record in 2018, the Big Heart Machine, and then you did this one now. I mean, it's a lot to write all this stuff or whatever, but to have that time in the beginning, to have all right, you get to work at night and then your whole day is writing, is a pretty good opportunity. But it's not always easy to find that, in our normal day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think that you just like basically summarized my dream life, and I've never felt it since I was in my early 20s, basically. But
sure.
Like I love getting to do like a long subbing for a Broadway person. Like if you can play a whole week of shows, I love that, because if you're just playing one show, if you're just subbing for one show, that's a huge amount of work and stress for only a couple hours of work and not that much of a monetary reward. But if you do it all week, you don't have to do that every day. You just kind of show up to the theater and all your stuff is there, and it frees up so much time. And that, I love that. I would love to have like a steady gig every day. But I know that that's just like such a rare thing.
But that's an attainable goal. I mean, it sounds like you're going in that direction. The ability to be able to play the shows and do the multiple woodwind thing and be able to nail it, and then be able to write in during the day.
Right. And like actually like some of my musical heroes are people that like listeners of this podcast probably would never have heard of because they're like working musicians.
Well,
And
give them a shot. I'm curious myself.
like
Anyway.
like well, the first guy who like allowed me to start working basically is named Brian Krock. And like I remember when I met this guy, we met because of our similarity of our names,
is that
and
right?
we ended up becoming really good friends. And when I met him, he blew my mind because he's like 15 years older than me. He's got a wife and 3 kids that he supports playing music. And I met him right after I moved out here.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, this guy like does it. It's possible to do. Like you can play music and make a living. And as I got to know him better, I realized like he does so much creative stuff every single day that he doesn't worry about if it like, he'll just be like, oh, I like wrote songs on guitar all day. For what reason? Just because I wanted to, like to me, that's awesome. Like,
Yeah.
That's really creativity. And he's not worried about whether people even hear it. And then he also does multiple woodwind stuff. And I don't know. I think that's really cool. Or like Charles Pillow comes to mind, one of my all-time heroes. Mm-hmm. He does so much creative. He's put out 2 big band records in the past 2 years.
That's wild.
Which is crazy. That's like and he teaches at Eastman and he plays Frozen every night. And I think that's so cool, man.
Yeah.
Like
that is encouraging too to see that, to see the people who are like the working people who are super creative and still make it happen. There were a lot of people that I met in Boston who had that same kind of approach. I'm from Boston originally and I went to school out there, but I think in particular of do you know Joe Morris, a guitar player?
Oh sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know.
Sure, but he has he plays only the music that he wants to play, and he lives in a house, and he's got a family, and he's got a life. You know what I mean? These kinds of people, it's like, man, it's possible to do it. It's funny because the view of musicians by the general public is like you're either Bruce Springsteen or you're like you're sleeping in a gutter or something like that. Like, but there's this whole world that we live in that's people who are able to make it happen and do the thing day to day and be creative But it's a constant struggle. Right. There's no doubt that there's the hustle involved, trying to keep it together.
And at the end of the day, I think like if you like, I think that I had a lot of problems when I was younger that were related to like sort of like ego, basically, like being like, this is boring, or I should be doing something cooler than this or whatever. And it was a problem with my own orientation to the world. And I think that if you really look at who the best musicians have been, they seem to always be people who are like eternally learning and open-minded.
Sure.
And so like, I don't think that if things had gone differently for Herbie Hancock and he didn't get that gig with Miles, maybe he would have ended up doing something else. But I'm sure he would have approached it with his open mind, like childlike wonder, and tried to learn as much as he could about it. Mm-hmm. And so that's, I think, what I'm trying to emulate, is like, you have a choice when you're approaching a situation. Like you could be like, oh man, this is the 3rd wedding I've played this weekend. This sucks. Or you could try really, it just takes effort. And so you can't be lazy, but you could try to approach it and be like, what could I do that would be interesting? Like, and
sure. Right. Like, how am I going to make this fun? Yeah. How am I going to make this new and different every night?
Right.
And that's important, especially the weddings, because that's like one of the most important days of their lives. I hate to see people phoning, just coming in and phoning it in. It's like, man, these people, like, we're here enhancing the night for these people who are, but it's not always easy. I find myself having to find ways of being creative, without,
right.
Keeping myself involved in the music without overdoing it,
Right.
I was fortunate to play with a band in Boston who'd let me bring my slide trumpet in and play parts on,
that's cool.
Slide trumpet on the thing, do whatever, get it together.
That's cool.
I've got a couple other things for you. When you were on the road, are there particular influences that you can pinpoint in when you were writing that music, like things that you were trying to synthesize, maybe, or put into the music, or because it's unique big band music. It isn't. You're not going to get, it's not Count Basie 2.0 or whatever. You've got like a particular approach. But who was it that kind of gave you ideas as to what you could throw into the pot?
Well, I mean, I stole a lot of ideas. It's just I think that maybe the influences are eclectic,
Mm-hmm.
On that record, I remember when I got the idea to use the recorder ensemble, which I think was really exciting. And that just I stole from a Ligeti violin concerto. He had the whole woodwind section play recorders and ocarinas, and I was like, wow, this is super hip to hear to hear these professional musicians like struggling to play a like a kindergarten instrument.
Sure, yeah.
And
That's
so,
hilarious.
and then a lot of like the sort of like, yeah, so I guess it's hard to pick like a specific influence, but in general, I would say like 20th century classical music, like multiple tempos at one time. The approach to tonality, I think, is indebted a lot to Thomas Addis, this British composer who has a great knack for using tonality but abstracting it in a way so when things repeat, they feel familiar, but they're not exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so I guess like a general distaste for exact repetition is an influence. And
Sure.
and like yeah, there's just a lot in the world of big band music. Like Darcy, James Argue, it was a big influence. And yeah, and metal music, like I think the approach to odd time signatures in my music is more closely aligned with metal than it is with jazz.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Sure.
When I say that, I'd mean like that, like in metal, the riffs that are in like sort of complex, like math metal or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The riffs are additive, it's like these groups of units of like in the music of Meshuggah, like it's always in 4/4, but they're like building with little units of 2 or 3. Sorry, my headphones are talking to me. And whereas in jazz, I think that odd time signatures are more approached as like a what would be the word? Like a something you would fill, like a container, and you want to have the flexibility to approach it from any angle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely not like that in my music.
Sure.
I think it's not like there's constantly a non-time signature going along and people are playing around with the rhythms inside of it. It's more like there's a very prescribed, written out riff or something that everybody plays the same every time,
Sure. Right. Yeah.
And then with the newer music, I've been trying to incorporate more influences that I've always had, but which I've never felt the confidence to utilize. Like I love Anthony Braxton's large ensemble music, but I think that I didn't have the maturity until recently to be willing to take the kind of risks that Braxton took throughout his career.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Boy,
like
he sure did. Yeah.
Yeah. So like on the newer music, I left sections where like there's like in the first track on Block the Stoppage, there's like crazy moments where like I gave people music and told them to play it at their own pace and not to listen to anyone around them. Or like there's times where like the drums are playing and I instructed the drummer to constantly change the tempo and don't, the minute people latch on to you, to change it. Just like just taking more chances and letting there be more danger in the music.
Sure.
And being less controlling and like suffocating, you know?
Yeah. And that's a hard balance to reach when you're writing the music, because it's easy to say, you know, I'm in charge. What am I writing here? How am I going to, you know, when I listen to this on finale, what's going to be the thing that comes, you know, or whatever, or Sibelius or whatever.
Yeah.
But then to say like, no, this is a living, breathing thing, and I'm going to give as much control as I can to the musicians, whom I trust to do to bring their own spirit and their own energy and their own creativity to the project. And that's what's going to make it good. That's what's going to make it fun to play and different all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty good.
So yeah, I guess I didn't answer that question very well. I'm not.
No, I think the answer is that it's coming from everywhere, that they're just little bits and pieces it sounds like you've just got an open mind where you're going to say, it doesn't matter where it's coming from. We're just going to use such and such a thing or experiment with these different things that you're hearing. And that could be from, you know, I often think that we live in this time where we have so much access to so much music, and we've got now, for the first time ever, you know, 100 years of recorded music, 100 plus years of recorded music, whereas before that, unless your sister knows how to play the piano, you might not hear any music, you know, for your whatever. And
right.
But now we have the opportunity to just put these different things together. It isn't like, you know, okay, well, I've never heard of that. Like I can in one night go and check out what they're playing in Serbia and Ethiopia and what they're, you know, and whoever. I can listen to Primus and Duke Ellington and whatever in the same night and take pieces from all of that and incorporate it into whatever it is, as long as you're thinking in terms of what you're trying to create and not in terms of putting yourself into a box or branding yourself in a particular way or whatever it happens to be.
Right.
Now, how did you put this out? You put it out, it's out on Bandcamp and Spotify. Is it on a label?
No, I started my own label for this.
Okay.
So I'm going to, it's a label just intended for my own releases. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do all of my projects like this from now on. And the reason being is that I had a great experience working with Nick Finzer and Outside In Music.
Mm-hmm. They've been doing some great stuff, man. They've been putting out so much great music.
Yeah, I really look up to Nick, even though I think he might be younger than me. But I mean, he just, okay. I love his hustle and his drive to do better every day, and he works so hard. And I worked with Matt Merowitz from Fully Altered Media as a publicist on my last two records. Mm-hmm. So that team was awesome. I think we did great work together and got some cool results.
Sure.
And then for this record and I think for the future, I'm more interested now in learning more about the cogs of the business and stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm just wanting to approach every aspect of my life as like, what can I learn from this? So now I'm like doing everything myself. Like I'm doing all the art myself, doing the publicity myself, and just sort of approaching it like an experiment because because I just done it the other way already, and I don't want to keep doing the same thing.
Sure.
I guess the minute something starts to feel like a pattern, I get a little distrustful of it, you know.
Sure.
I'm like, I want everything to feel creative and fun and fresh and stuff. So
no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, pretty good. Seems like you're on the right path, man. Seems like you're on the right path to keeping everything fresh.
Thanks, dude. Yeah. And, so I mean, I don't know how. Have you released your own music, or do you work with a label?
My album's coming out on Friday. I've got a non-net based on the instrumentation from The Birth of the Cool. But I've been writing all new music for that. Yeah, so
dope,
it's
dude. That's
Friday.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What's that called?
Well, I call it my Revenge of the Cool non-net. The record is called Revenge. Is going to be called Revenge of the Cool. But there's a lot of stuff that I've written that goes pretty far beyond that aesthetic. But some of this stuff I was like, I put the stuff on there that was in some respects influenced, although maybe vaguely by, the old Gil Evans stuff or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. So you're putting that out yourself?
Actually, Sunnyside Records is putting it out.
Oh, cool.
This is one of these that I was happy to try to get some people to help, because there's a world that I know, which is writing music and playing trumpet and directing a band and talking to an audience. This stuff is completely within my wheelhouse. But the whole part of it that is trying to get the music to people who are going to listen to it or publicize it in one way or another. This is a world that I don't think any of us really wants to be involved in if we can help it. We want to be in the position where we can just be creative and not worry about it. But we no longer live in a world where Columbia Records or Prestige or Impulse is going to come out of the woodworks and say, no, we're going to pay you to record the album and then we'll take care of the rest of it. And I don't even know if we'd want to live in that world anymore. But it's certainly it's been very helpful to have Francois and the people at Sunnyside on the side of the business side of it, because that's a world that I'm interested in, but it's a lot to navigate. Right.
And I think it's great to work with other people too, because it's learning about what, like, there's just so many aspects to, like, publicity, management, all these kind of things that you just can't know unless you observe it.
Exactly. Exactly. Right.
So you're going to learn a lot. And that's why, like, a lot of younger musicians will ask, like, do you recommend spending money on a publicist? Do you recommend shopping your records around to labels? And the answer to everything is yes. Like, I think you just have to approach your career like an experiment. You're never going to learn unless you try. And some things will work for you and some things won't. Mm-hmm. And each new experience, you'll just sort of, like, add to your bag of knowledge and slowly hone what works for you,
Exactly.
So there's no like prescribed right way to do things.
Yeah.
I remember with the Big Heart Machine record, I really was, like, constantly texting older musicians or asking them if I could buy them coffee to, like, sit down and ask their advice. And I thought about it so hard and realized, like, you just got to do something, do whatever, take whatever path is in front of you, and then you'll slowly hone it,
Yeah. And it speaks to what you were talking about the, about perfectionism, because you have to be willing to fail. You have to be open to failure. Like, we're going to try this out and just do something and do the best you can and be informed, but who knows? We don't know what, you don't know how it's going to pan out.
And you don't even know how you should judge whether or not something is a failure or a success.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
So, like, a lot of the times you might feel that if you aren't getting a lot of plays on YouTube, or if you aren't getting a lot of listens on Spotify, or if you aren't whatever, that feels like a failure. But that's just another situation, I think, where you have to and I fall prey to that constantly. When you have a big release coming out and you want congratulations, you want people to be listening, but again, you just have to reorient yourself and realize, like, that might be completely apart from what the whole experience is actually about.
Right.
Like, it might feel like a failure that nobody's listening to your music now, but it's out there for the world, and you only need like one person to hear it and fall in love with it and want to hire you for something to, like, it's, and that's just one of many examples,
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I think it's really probably healthier, at least for me, to not worry too much about those things. Like, once the album's out, you have to be a good parent to it. You have to
Sure,
usher it, try to give it as many chances of success as you can, usher it into the world. Sometimes you have to be one of those annoying parents who, like, bothers people on the internet over and over again, emailing over and over again or whatever, but until you get a no or a yes,
Sure.
But once it's out, it's also just like, you did it. It's a success because you did something, and you could have done nothing.
Right. So. Exactly. Yep. And it's the stepping stone to whatever happens to be the next thing.
Yeah, exactly.
All about the process. No doubt.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Brian. Thanks for doing this, man. I think we've covered a lot of ground here for sure.
Yeah, you have a lot of material to sift through. I had a blast talking to you, man. It's good to see you.
Man, great. You too. Well, hopefully we'll.
I'd love to hear about what you're doing these days too. You know, it's always weird when you're when this conversation is one-sided in a way about.
Yeah. I know what you're saying. Yeah, but I wanted to try to highlight. You know, you just put out the album, and I've been talking to a lot of people, man, and you know, a lot of them are older folks who've been in the thing for a long time, and it's great to get to talk to somebody who's doing it. You know, who's in the middle of it and trying to work it out.
Definitely, who's new at it for sure. You know.
But in the process, man, it's critical. You know?
Should say that disclaimer every time I speak publicly is just FYI, I reserve the right to be completely wrong about all of this because I'm just figuring it out.
For sure. But that's how you operate. You got to do it, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. But I feel like the older folks, they're just trying to figure it out too, man. The world is changing constantly. You never know.
I think it might be a really hard time right now to be an older person because, like, I mean, as difficult as technology seems to you and I'm sure it's really overwhelming if you've never like you know used an interface or you know what I mean, like but what's cool is I think like the older musicians have been coming out of the woodwork to like let people know like that they're still the shit, like they're still the masters. Like I love like what Tony Cadlick's been putting out on Facebook. These great, you know, like multiple screen videos of him overdubbing himself. It's like, oh yeah, that guy is like still the master.
Sure.
He might not have the best editing chops or whatever, but
yeah.
The musicianship is just like bar none, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I do somewhat worry that our generation and the younger generations put too much, you know, like value on the presentation of things, like the perceived coolness of it and the actual content might be secondary to that.
100%.
And so. But that's like a whole nother hour of talking.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, great, man. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you,
of course, dude,
coming on, and hopefully, I'll tell you what. We'll once we're out of here, we'll get a beer sometime. I'll tell you about.
I would love.
I'll tell you how the Non-Net record came out. I'll tell you how it worked.
I can't wait to listen to it, man. Congrats
Thanks.
on that. That's a big accomplishment.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's the first in a stepping stone.
Of course,
now
man.
I got to do something else. Yeah.
Exactly.